Waar die wilgers welig spruit, doringboom sy skadu sprei, soos ons groei in kundigheid, mag U ons lei. Sien ons hoe hier lei met die hand, laat U sien rus oor ons land. Strong streams united flow, Africa stands proud and tall. As we learn, we trust, we know God is in control. Bless us, O Lord, guide us with grace. May Northwest be blessed always. Bless us, O Lord, sien ons hier, oris Jehovah Morena, sien ons, bless us, O Lord.
Goeienaand, dames en heren. Good evening. Lumela. Saubo. Probela. My name is Herman van der Merwe. I am the Deputy Dean responsible for teaching and learning in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. And it's going to be my privilege tonight to welcome you to this festive event, to this inaugural address. A very special welcome to Prof. Sonia Swanepoel. She's our Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Community Engagement and Campus Operations on the Mahikeng campus. And you all know that she's also been the Executive Dean, the first Executive Dean of this faculty. Hearty welcome to you. Prof. Wynand Grobler, the Director of the School of Economic Sciences. Prof. Elmarie Slabbert, the Research Director of Trees. Professor Andre Heymans, the Deputy Director in the School of Economic Sciences on the Potchefstroom campus. Professor Raymond Parsons, our Chairperson at the Noordwes-Universiteit Business School, Business Schools Advisory Board. And also a hearty welcome to those people online that will be looking and watching and sharing in this experience online. So also to Professor Babs Surujal, our Executive Dean, Professor Ntebo Moroke, our Deputy Dean responsible for Community Engagement and Stakeholder Relations, Professor Verona Leenderts, our Deputy Dean Research and Innovation, other directors and deputy directors here present and also those online, and of course the colleagues. What a wonderful, wonderful privilege to have you here as well, to come and share in this event. But the reason why we're here today. Prof. Anmar, hearty welcome to you, to your friends and your family. Enjoy the moment. It is a wonderful, wonderful privilege to be here to share this with friends and colleagues. But specifically, I want to welcome her mother, Mariki, her brothers and sister, her husband, and then colleagues Professor Schenk from the University of Western Cape, Professor Aita from the University of Johannesburg, and Dr. Usay Asibi, also from the University of Johannesburg. I really hope that you're also going to enjoy the evening with us and also share in this festive time. It is a proud and joyful occasion for the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences and all of us here to do this kind of thing. It's very, very special. And maybe to share with you that the concept professor was first recorded in the 14th century. And it was deducted from the word Latin that means a person who professes or to be an expert in some sort of art or as a teacher of the highest rank. As a noun, it is profeteri, meaning to lay claim or to declare openly, or to profess. That is what a professor is. It was first recorded in 1706 as a title prefixed to a name, and the short term Prof was first recorded in 1838. Now, with that as a background, in recognition of excellence and exceptional academic leadership, the Northwest University confer bearers of these qualities to profess to be an excellent teacher. We confer the title professor. So I must say that the Northwest University, and specifically our faculty, comes with some stringent requirements. So Anmar, I'm talking to you and to those of you who want to become a professor. A professor in our faculty must be an intellectual leader in their respective subject field. And we recognize all of these tonight. You must be recognized by your colleagues and the industry as a leader in your field. You must be extensively involved in sharing your knowledge with peers and the industry. You need to initiate and create research opportunities, guide and supervise students. You need to train and encourage staff members, junior staff members. Act as a role model for them and for your students, and make a substantial contribution to the effective management and functioning of the school and the faculty. And of course, I'm not going to leave that out. You must be an outstanding and innovative lecturer. So, with those words, I can then declare that Professor Pretorius has complied with all the above as set by the university. And that is why we're all here today at this inaugural lecture. This is an opportunity for the newly promoted professor to inform the colleagues, your peers, and the general public about their research career thus far, update us on some current and future research directions, and it really marks a pinnacle of the professor's intellectual pursuit. And now that we also can do it online, it is also made publicly available, internationally available. And that is so wonderful. An inaugural address also represents an essential component of the university's public events program, helping us to create a broader awareness of the latest developments in research in the faculty and the university. And the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences are privileged to have 6 staff members this year presenting their inaugural addresses in various disciplines. Prof. Anmar, tonight you can celebrate this important personal milestone with family, friends, and colleagues. And as we all know, and we can agree that South Africa and our contribution to the economic development in Africa and globally is significant. the question remains, where does South Africa fit into this equation? Now, a little confession from my side. I had some inside information, and I think just some advice from me. I think you should buckle up, because in the global financial markets and where we fit, I really look forward to this inaugural. I now request Professor Andre Heymans, the Deputy Director of the school, to introduce Prof. Anmar Pretorius to us.
Good evening, everyone. And Prof. Herman, yes, Anmar definitely meets all those requirements and more. Anmar Pretorius was born on the 25th of April, 1969 in the Postmasburg district of the Northern Cape as the second of 4 children of Atti and Mariki Pretorius. In 1987, she matriculated from Olifantshoek High School with an average A symbol. In 1988, she enrolled for a BCom degree at the University of the Free State. In Bloemfontein, she obtained a BCom degree, a BCom honors degree in economics, a MCom in economics, as well as a higher education diploma. All of these qualifications were passed with distinction. In 1991, she received the Dean's Medal for the Best Honors Study student in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. Anmar started her academic career as a tutor and later junior lecturer in the School of Economics at the University of the Free State. In 2003, she married Derek Blau and the couple moved to Gauteng. In 2004, she joined UNISA, and Anmar moved to Monash Monash, South Africa in 2008, where she received various teaching awards. She was finally she came home. Finally, she joined the NWU in 2013. In 2016, together with co-author P.F. Blau, Derek, she was awarded the Trade Research Publication Center for the 2015 paper published in the journal with the highest impact factor. She also obtained a DCom in economics from UJ in the same year, 2016. Between 2004 and 2009, she presented econometrics courses at the South African Reserve Bank College in Pretoria. Anmar is an active member of the Economic Society of South Africa and has served in various positions over the years. First, as secretary of the Bloemfontein branch between 1998 and 2003. She was then asked to fill the role of national treasurer in 2006, a position she held until 2013. She was later elected as ESA council member and served from 2015 to 2019. Anmar has presented 31 national and 20 international conferences and published 31 papers in accredited international and national journals. She also authored 3 chapters in peer-reviewed books and has acted as co-author for specific chapters in the 2018 edition of Philip Moore's Understanding Macroeconomics. Anmar regularly acts as external examiner for dissertations and theses and peer reviews journal articles and conference contributions for conferences such as the Infinity Conference on International Finance hosted by the Trinity College in Dublin. She also acts as external moderator for modules offered by UNISA, the University of Free State, UJ, and the University of Stellenbosch. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, family, I present to you Anmar Pretorius.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to stand so that some of you can see me. But we also need the camera sort of to. So, here you come too. Then the microphone won't keep me. Okay. It is indeed my privilege tonight to be here and to address you. So, family, friends, colleagues, and then distinguished guests, everybody from in the various management positions. Bear with me, and I like to share a part of my research journey with you. So, before I start with, so the topic is global financial markets. Where does South Africa fit in, or alternatively, does South Africa fit in? So, sort of to tell you where it started, if you ask me what I think is my area of research expertise, it's probably applied econometrics. So I like to play around with numbers and figures. I like to analyze data. So that is why if Professor Rini Schenk, we'll mention her later on, if she comes up and she has data on surveys that they've done, it's difficult to tell her, no, I don't want to look at your data. So, and the same with Professor Adele Barend in Sweden. She recently introduced us to the world of Uber and B&Bs. So I don't know why, she's a marketer, but she has access to all of these data. So I think that is what I love to do, but my first love will be the financial markets. So that is why I thought I will do my inaugural address today on the financial markets. So in the lime of the Northwest-University, it all started here. So it started in my third year at the Free State University, when our international economics lecturer, Mr. Jannie van Zyl, sent us to the library, Prof. Raymond, to get this edition of the South African Journal of Economics. And yes, in those times, we went to the library and we physically copied the article, okay, so it wasn't online. So those of you working in the area of trade, Professor Strydom, so the title was South Africa in World Trade. And as a third-year student, it was quite intimidating and eye-opening to see where South Africa fit in. What do we do? What's our role in international trade? So, yeah, I can keep you busy forever. Prof. Strydom, I later met him, and his daughter actually shared a hostel with me in the Free State University. Okay. So it started here, South Africa in World Trade, in my third year. And then the next trigger was in 1998. So it was the first time ever that I went overseas. A friend of mine was on a 2-year working holiday in the south of England. Some of your older students will remember that. So I'm scared of flying, as you all know. So I promised her that I will go over on my own if we can go to Scotland. So we booked ourselves a backpacker tour through Scotland. But the story was, in those days, we bought pounds. Okay, so I bought pounds for R8.35 in Bloemfontein. And we went over to the UK, and we were in the Scottish Highlands for a week. And when we came back to Edinburgh, on all of the the exchange, they look, and then it cost more than 11 rand for £1. And we were like okay, so what happened now? What did we miss? So this is sort of the next trigger. And then for the knowledgeable people to tell us it's because of what's happening in Russia, and it's because of what happened in East Asia. And I mean, yeah, it was quite difficult to make the link if you come from the Scottish Highlands at that point. So that started a research career on emerging markets. So I actually found this in my archives. It was the first ever international conference that I presented at in 2001 in Budapest, the Hungarian Association of Risk Managers. Wow, okay. We were quite intimidated by all of the knowledgeable people. The three of us, none of us had a title. None of us was a doctor or a prof. It was quite relaxed to be there as the novices. So why this then also triggered was, so we did this paper on the emerging markets because that's now where we are. And on the shuttle from the hotel to the conference was this US trader, very knowledgeable, and he asked us, okay, so who are you? And we said, we're from South Africa. And he said, okay, so why are you here? And we said, but we are part of the emerging markets group. And he looked at us and he asked, why would anyone worry about individual countries in the emerging markets group? So that was what triggered me, that idea of we are labeled as an emerging market country, and that is how our investors sort of regard us. So this is where it started. So then, and yeah, as you said, this will be on YouTube, and a lot of the people that I'm going to talk to and talk about is not here tonight. But so that's why quite late in my career, I did a PhD. I was looking for the right supervisor to help me in this field. So I enrolled for a PhD at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Aleka Bundi, then from UJ, later on from the South African Reserve Bank, and currently from the World Bank was my supervisor, and it was quite a journey. So the question in the end was, what is South Africa's financial market integration with the rest of the world? Is it the developed markets or the emerging markets that we mostly co-move with? And the focus was on the stock market, the bond market, and the foreign exchange market. So just to give you some background, so the emerging markets was sort of first started in 1986, the first emerging market category for portfolio investment. And the first definitions was the idea of emerging, that change is underway, the market is growing, and that it is still relatively small and some appearance of change. Or the stock market in a developing economy, no matter how developed the stock market itself may be, with the implication that the stock market's potential to emerge is further strongly linked to the economy's overall development potential. So if you look at the current definitions of emerging markets, it's quite different. So I use the FTSE classification, and FTSE mainly focuses on the financial markets and their level of development. And then one of the questions, for instance, would be, do you have an active futures market? Okay? But one of the requirements still, they look at the level of per capita income, sort of the total growth or the total GDP of the country. The IMF definition focused more on, again, the level of development, per capita income, and then the level of diversification in your export portfolio, as well as the level of industrialization. So South Africa, after our reintroduction into the world markets in 1994-95, were added to all of the emerging market indices. At this stage, we are classified as an advanced emerging country with Brazil, the Czech Republic, Greece, Hungary, Malaysia, Mexico, Poland, Taiwan, Thailand, and Turkey. So that is sort of the background to this. And then, as I said, for my PhD then, we started looking at where do we fit in. But the other part of the background was this. Sort of this dualistic nature of the South African financial market. So we are classified as an emerging market with the idea that there's potential to grow and that we should grow. But at the same time, we had quite a sophisticated financial system. Now, if everybody tells you that South Africa is important to the world, it's sort of nice to hear. But if you hear about a sophisticated financial system and you go overseas and you experience it, so one of the times that we were overseas, when you swipe your credit card, they still use those little machines. Okay, I don't know if you remember. Okay, and then in South Africa, we were already way beyond that. Okay, and one of my students at Monash University, one of the honor students, worked at Absa, and at some point he went over to London to help Barclays with their internet banking. So then you realize, okay, so yes, it's not just a story. We are quite sophisticated in the international systems. And then the JSE, one of the oldest stock exchanges, established in 1887 after the discovery of diamonds. So this dualistic nature. In the Global Competitiveness Report of 2013, you see all of the rankings there. The JSE was ranked first for effectiveness of regulation, Second, for availability of financial services after Switzerland. Second, for financing through local equity market after Hong Kong. And third, for the soundness of banks after Canada and New Zealand. Okay, so that sort of triggered the question. So we have the sophisticated financial system. We are classified as emerging. But if we then look at the different markets, stock markets, the bond markets, where do we really fit in? So this then led to my PhD. And I thought what I should do is give you a summary of my PhD results, and then I went and sort of redo it for the last 10 years to complete the picture. So for the PhD study, for the stock market part of it, we used data stream data. We had 451 industries of 50 countries, and that included all of the sub-industries. So it will be the overall share index, but also finances, the financial markets, and then the mining, stuff like that. Okay? So we had 451 indices, daily data that we then converted into weekly. So the time period, 1998 until August 2011, and with these weekly data, we then calculated the returns as log-first differences, and then the big thing, then had a developed market subsample and an emerging market subsample. So if you look at just at some of the descriptive stats, for this specific time period, then the JSE was had the 17th highest average weekly return. And if you look at my color coding there, it was South Africa is there, the 17th highest weekly average return for that time period. And it's slap bang in the middle between the emerging markets in green and then developed markets in yellow. So sort of that idea of we are in between. If you look at the standard deviation, we were 20th, less volatile than the emerging markets, but more volatile than the developed markets. So the rest of the study then in the methodology involves where you extract common factors, latent common factors, and it's sort of general trends that you observed from then the movements and the variation in these different groups. So you use various statistical techniques. We're not going to list them, Andrea, but the whole idea of eigenvalues, Bayesian and critical values, and so on. So for the stock market, the developed markets needed two factors in order sort of to explain the total variation in the group of developed markets, where the first factor explained 44% of the variation and the second factor only 3%. So with the whole idea that the developed markets are quite uniform, okay, so the movement is sort of quite the same. You can explain it by means of basically one common factor. The emerging markets a little bit more diversified. Also two factors, 29.7% and 5.49%, but then the main idea behind this then, in order to decide and to determine how integrated we are, in what way we do co-move with these groups then, you regress the South African weekly returns on the two different common factors. So if you look at that, in the end, we found that for the developed markets, almost 60% of the variation in the South African stock market can be explained by the developed market factors and 67% by the emerging markets. So sort of two conclusions. Yes, we are integrated, we do co-move, but in this sense, more with the emerging markets than the developed markets. Then just sort of to add a little bit more is if you now have these two common factors, these sort of basic trends that you observe, and then you look at correlations between those common factors and specific economic variables in order to see so that it's not just a black box. So what we found was for the stock markets in general, whether it's now developing or emerging, in the end, it is commodity prices that drive those stock markets, okay? Especially industrial metals. So that's sort of a little bit more of background. But so the South African stock market for that period more integrated with the emerging markets. Then, and Professor Eita, you will remember that we were in our offices when I did this. So in order, because this is for quite a long period, so we ran 24-week rolling regressions, where for every 24 week period, you then regress the South African returns on those common factors to see how that level of integration or co-movement vary. So look at the red one, the developed, and the green one, the emerging one. So if you look at it sort of generally, there are different times when one of these two different groups dominate. Certain periods where there's less co-movement, and that then is linked to country-specific happenings in the specific country. So there's no co-movement. So this doesn't necessarily mean that the stock market declined. It just means that we didn't move with either one of these two groups for whatever reason. And we did list a few, but we're not going into that. So if we look at it then sort of, and importantly towards the end, you see that the emerging market, the green line, is much higher than the developed. So that sort of, in my mind, raised the question that, okay, so from now on, we are more going to co-move with the emerging markets. But then Professor Kabundi isn't here, but while I was busy with my PhD, he would always tell me, Anmar, don't preempt your results. Okay, don't preempt. So Ale will probably watch this. Ale, I did it again. I did preempt it, and I thought that for the next time period, the emerging markets will dominate. So if we focus on the bonds market, so we looked at the daily bid yield for 10-year government bonds. We only had 38 countries in the group. And then, because some of the emerging market countries, their bonds only became active quite later, our sample started in 2003. Same story, we had weekly averages. We did the first difference to get it stationary in order to do the component analysis. And again, there's two separate samples. If we then look at the average weekly yield, we see that South Africa had the third highest yield, okay? And quite similar to all of the emerging markets. So the highest yields under all of the emerging markets, and you will understand it probably better than me. And then with the developed markets later on. Okay? So if you look at this, it sort of preempts your result of, okay, perhaps here we are part of the emerging markets. So the same story, we extracted common factors. And for the bonds market, we actually, for both of the groups, needed three factors in order to explain that. So a little bit less uniform, quite more diverse trends in both of these groups. So the first factor for the developed markets explaining 46%, declining, and the emerging market only 22%. So the same story, if we then regress the South African yields on the common factors, we found that the level of integration with the developed markets is only 9%. So we really don't co-move with the developed bond markets. It's actually the emerging markets with a 47-48%. You can see that it is much lower than the stock markets. But yeah, so in terms of the bonds, South Africa, then an emerging market. And the same story, we ran the 24-week rolling regressions. And this makes for interesting reading. If you just look at it at some point, you can see that it seems like we have an overall increasing trend, okay? But we also see the variation towards the end. Okay, so in the beginning, the developed and the emerging, the red and the green line, okay? At some point, quite close to each other, but later on, it sort of differ. And then they will mention stuff like country-specific factors, especially here in 2009. That lead to that. And then just, If we then again look at the link between the common factors from the bonds market and economic factors, it's interesting to see that the developed bond markets is mainly driven by the German interest rates, whereas the emerging market ones are driven by the US interest rate and then the different emerging market currencies, the exchange rates. So that is the difference that we see there. So again, Ale, if I then preempt this is quite a substantial difference, okay? Where the emerging markets almost 80% of the variation and the developed markets quite low towards the end of the PhD. And then when I started with the inaugural address and when we started with the preparations, okay, let's just quickly, yeah. The idea was then to extend this and to see, okay, so what happened? And with a focus on the last decade and to stop before COVID and to stop before what is happening and unfolding in the Ukraine. So for this last 10-year period then, and unfortunately, yeah, I didn't have access to the same data, but with a little help of a friend, I could access the data. So we started with daily data, and we had the all-share indices, not all of the different sub-indices, only the all-share indices for 46 countries. And if we do the same thing and we compare it for the weekly average returns, South Africa now is 29th, okay? And if you look at that, it's interesting to note that from Australia onwards, all of those weekly average returns were negative, okay? And then again, South Africa sort of in between, but not as obvious as last, okay? So now you can see it's quite a mix. And during the PhD sample, the returns on the emerging markets were quite high, whereas now the returns on the emerging markets weren't that high. So that is the difference that we observe here. So the same story, we extract common factors, and for the developed markets, 70% explained by one common factor. So with the idea that in this last decade, the co-movement there was much more pronounced, okay, much more similar movements in the developed stock markets, the second factor adding only 6%. For the emerging markets, 45% and 7%. And then, if we do the same story and we run the regression, we found that for the last decade, 66% of the variation in the South African stock market returns can be explained by the developed markets factors, opposed to 67% by the emerging markets. So that is quite different than the picture that we ended off. But yeah, so in the last decade, not that pronounced difference between the developed and the emerging markets. If we look at the variance share, our rolling regressions again, the emerging markets, the red one, the blue one, the developed markets, you see sort of the similarity, how it co-moves to the same extent. A certain period where the developed markets dominated, but then another period where the emerging markets dominated. But overall, you can see that the co-movement between these two and the common factors are much more similar than what it was before. So, yeah, and that sort of raises the question then, so what happened to the bonds market? And in the bonds market, last decade, 42 countries, because more of the emerging market countries now had active bond markets, government bonds. So if we repeat it then, South Africa had the 6th highest average bid yield at 8.22%. And you remember last time we were 3rd, so a little bit less risky than some of the others. Egypt had an average of 15, and Switzerland, as you would imagine, the lowest at 0.43. So for the bonds market, I guess if we look at the picture, then there are no surprises here. South Africa, again, sort of moving with that, emerging bond markets. And now it sort of gets boring if we look at the methodology. So we extract the 3 common factors for the developed markets and for the emerging markets. And then in the end, we estimate the level of co-movement. So what you will see here is in the previous period, our co-movement or integration with the developed markets were only 9%. Now it's 22%. So much more of a co-movement with the developed market bonds and the emerging markets slightly higher. Previously it was 47%, now 49%. But yeah, so again, sort of confirming the idea that the South African bond market very much emerging and not acting and co-moving with the developed markets. So the variance share again, okay? So if we look at these, then there are a few interesting periods. So sort of right through the emerging markets dominating the developed markets trends, except for that, for a few periods. Okay, so if you look at They will refer to Nene Gate here in 2016, where you can see the co-movement with both the developed and emerging going down. And then in 2019, they attribute sort of that to Ramaphosa, sort of when President Ramaphosa was elected, the whole idea of, okay, so what now in South Africa? So the other interesting thing that I observe from here is, again, if you look at the end, this is quite interesting, that towards the end of 2019, the co-movement with the developed market bonds are increasing and is much higher than the emerging markets. So, I don't know, perhaps I went through this too quickly, but that is the story regarding bonds market, stock market, and where do we fit in. Then, if I then can spend a little bit more time on this one, after COVID and after the Ukraine invasion, I did a study on only the stock market, and this is currently under review somewhere. So if one of you are the reviewer, then please be kind, okay? So what we did was to look at the various advanced emerging countries, the 11, of which South Africa is one, and then to see sort of an event study analysis where you look at 30 trading days after that specific event and ask, okay, so what happened? So the idea is not to include too long period, because especially for COVID, then the country-specific stuff come in. So South Africa had more cases. South Africa had more deaths, where some of the other countries didn't officially. So before all of those stuff kicked in, and then also the Ukraine invasion, with the idea that South Africa is an emerging market together with Poland, one of the neighbors, together with Hungary, the other neighbor, and then to see, okay, so what was the immediate impact of the happenings in Ukraine on the South African stock market? So what I did here was to then calculate the average, again, sort of the average return in the stock market for the 30 trading days after January the 20th. That's sort of officially one of the official dates of when COVID started. That's when the Chinese admitted that there is a problem, because it was before the World Health Organization and before our first case. So if you look at that then, so in terms of the returns for that specific 30 days, Taiwan had the highest return, followed by Hungary, okay? And then if we look at South Africa sort of the 8th highest, okay? So sort of not some of the lowest returns in that 30 days. If you look at the standard deviation, that gives you an idea of volatility, then again, South Africa 9th, okay? Malaysia the least volatile, and if you look at Greece, I think Greece anyway is in trouble, okay? So if we look at the Ukraine invasion, then if you look at the return for the 30 days after February 24th, I think, okay? Then you see that Brazil had the highest return, not that much affected. And then, as you would expect it, the countries sort of close to Hungary, the neighboring one, and then Poland, not that low, but South Africa, the 4th highest returns for that specific time period. And if we look at the standard deviation, sort of the volatility in that after the Ukraine invasion, South Africa 5th, and then, yeah, compared to Thailand, that wasn't affected that much, and then also Malaysia. So, yeah. So, in the end, the question then was, if you look then at 1998 until now, what happened? And if you look at the classification regarding developed and emerging, it was interesting to see which countries actually were reclassified or upgraded to developed status from advanced emerging. Greece, but now you'll see Greece again was downgraded. So things in Greece, okay, not really, okay. Israel was upgraded, South Korea upgraded, and Poland, towards the end of 2018, according to the FTSE classification, upgraded to developed, according to the MSCI, still advanced emerging. Greece was downgraded to being from developed to emerging. And then, as you all know, South Africa lost our investment status, the dreaded junk investment status, in April 2020. Prof. Waldo, and you will remember when we had Brexit, nobody expected the yes vote for Brexit. And that morning, Waldo came in smiling and he said, yes, now we have a structural break for our regressions, okay? So, and we all, well, I was waiting for the downgrade to get the structural break for the junk status. And well, it was now mixed with a COVID story, so in the end, you don't really see that. But the other downside was, if you look at the Global Competitiveness Report, in the beginning you saw those high rankings for South Africa. I did look for the latest ones and then decided, I see Francie smiling, and then I decided not to mention it because it looked bad, okay? Much worse than in the beginning. So I think that is the downside to it. So although we are co-moving still with the stock markets of the developed countries, although we are at a higher level dancing with, as Ali always say, dancing with the developed markets in terms of the bonds market, we did lose a lot of ground, okay? And then if you look at these values, then South Africa is not the best performing stock market from the emerging market groups after COVID and the Ukraine invasion. So I expected that perhaps South Africa would also be upgraded to developed status, but yeah. So if we then ask the question, where does South Africa fit in, or does South Africa fit in? You probably meet all the financial market requirements to be a developed market. If you look at, as I said, we do have an active futures market. We tick all of those boxes, but as the economist will know, our per capita income is too low. And that's probably the one that is currently, and that will for quite a long time, keep us as being classified as emerging. In terms of the stock markets, we are firmly between the developed and emerging markets. And then I guess it's because of the role of commodities. So we said commodities was the main driver of the stock markets in the developed group. So we do have commodities, and then our level of industrialization also higher than some of the other emerging markets. Unfortunately, we are a typical emerging bond market, and I say unfortunately because at some point it did bear some fruit. 2009, after the Euro bond crisis, the emerging markets did gain quite a lot, okay? So the yields were much higher. But in that sense, is a typical emerging bond market, high yields, more risky than some of the developed markets, and as we've seen just now, not always the best performer in the emerging markets group. So we are classified as an emerging market, and I guess we are likely to stay there for some time. Now, and then further, Prof. Parsons, the whole idea of policy decisions and what do you do? I guess most of you read the Sunday Times over the weekend and the whole story about the grey listing, okay? So that's very much on the agenda, and Standard & Poor's actually saying that if South Africa end up on the grey list, it will have more detrimental effects than when we were downgraded to junk status. So that's another warning light, okay? So if that happens, then, okay? And then, as you all know, load shedding, the whole energy story, the impact on growth, and then on our per capita income, all of the stories about SMMEs and how do you grow and not grow. And then, Anton, some of the recent developments in competition policy where there are also warning lights. So, yeah. So that is then my answer to that. And then yesterday, yeah, well, this is a very personal journey, so let me be personal. Yesterday evening, Professor Frederik Fourie called me and he said, I can't be there, but, and then I tell him the story, and then those of you who studied with him, Frederik always, if you wrote something, he wrote, so what? So after I told him the whole story, he said, okay, Anmar, so what does it mean? So then I thought, okay, perhaps I should say something about what does it mean. So what does it mean then if we are in this emerging market group? And I think that's that idea of, okay, so like in 1998, if something goes wrong in Russia or in the other emerging markets, then South Africa is also bearing the brunt because the investors, like the guy in the shuttle to the conference, would say, okay, emerging markets, warning lights, okay, we'll withdraw our money from all of that. So if the investors follow that approach, and if they regard all of the emerging markets sort of the same, then it is not good for us then to be a part of the emerging markets if things go wrong in the other emerging markets. Okay, so that's the story. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you will bear with me, after an academic career of almost 30 years, yes, you saw my birth date. I thought I could skip it, but it's there, okay? So after an career of almost 30 years, there's quite a few people and institutions that I would like to thank. So I will start with Ernst, and I won't take too long. I know that some of us, okay? So start at the Noordwes-universiteit, Prof. Sonja, and then also the executive. Thank you for the opportunity to do this and to do it this year. We were actually supposed to do it last year online, and Esme, with a few, we asked for postponement. Thank you for that, to be able to do it like this. Then Prof. Herman, as part of the executive deanery, thank you for this opportunity. So we have attended inaugural addresses at other universities. Other universities do not do it on the scale. Other faculties do not do it on the scale. We are economists. Esme doesn't want to tell me what the budget is, but I know this comes from the executive dean's budget. Thank you. Okay, it's indeed a privilege. Then at the Noordwes-universiteit, Esme and the team, everybody involved with this evening, your attention to detail to me is astounding. Okay, so Esme, Jana, Shantay, Ilza, everyone involved, thank you so much for your trouble and your detail. And then everyone involved in the process 2 years ago when the promotion process was going on. Okay, so that also was quite a process to get the reviewer's report. Thank you. Okay. Then the colleagues, my current colleagues, thank you for the collegiality. Okay, thank you for, you all know about COVID, some of you, the friendships that we had during COVID and how we supported each other. And then also, if I can pinpoint a few, Carly, for our work at Uniwider. So we were at Treasury working on this, and for the first time I had to do higher order stuff in Stata. And I'm not that confident in Stata. Carly was highly pregnant. Carly was on this side, and if there was an error message, I sent her the photograph, and she will come up with a solution. Carly, thank you. Then Chris, when I redid this for the last 10 years, I had to align stock market daily data for 50 countries, each one with their own holidays. And I did it by hand for 2 weeks, and then Chris came to me. Andre, don't laugh. Chris came to me, and I said, Chris, is there an easier way? And he just smiled, and he showed me the easier way. Chris, thank you. Thank you for that. Then for the colleagues in the passage, we don't always have official research seminars, but you know what happens in the passage and in the tea room. Waldo is excellent with new ideas. So if we talk about a research idea, Waldo would say, okay, but what about this angle? Sometimes nowadays, Waldo, I'll mention this, Waldo will say, Anmar, that's a bad idea. And I also appreciate that, okay? So, and then Andrea will always say, Anmar, but don't you know about that database? I mean, really, you know, so. Thank you for that collegiality and everything there. Then, please bear with me, as I said. So I'll start then at the University of the Free State where I studied. Professor Frederik Fourie, apart from all of the academic knowledge that he taught us, I would like to share 2 things with you and thank him for that. The first one was we did a 2-week master's exam on econometric modeling where you had to build a model of the South African macroeconomy. And when I submitted it after 2 weeks, he looked at me and he said, Anmar, are you happy with your model? And I said, yes, but the VAT one isn't. And he looked at me and he said, that is the nature of research. At some point you have to stop and you can always continue and do do something more. So thank you for that. And then the other thing, as you probably know, he went into the management of the universities, and after quite a few years, he came back, and at an Economic Society conference, Prof. Raymond, at Stellenbosch University, Prof. Frederick took a session where he challenged the economist, and he said, I've been out of academia for 15 years. The biggest problem in South Africa is unemployment. I look at the SHIE and nobody works on unemployment, sort of, where's your focus? And he had a list of all of the research gaps, and yeah. And as we speak, he's busy with community surveys in the rural areas, so that's quite an inspiration. So may all of us have such a long and interesting research career. Professor Elwil Bekes, he lectured development economics. It wasn't my first love. And during one March holiday, as an honor student, he asked us to summarize the World Development Report. I don't know who of you have ever read through a World Development Report. Okay, so when on holiday, you read through the whole report, you make a summary, and when we ended up in class, he sat there and he said, did you notice that word in the middle of that specific paragraph, in the middle of the whole report? That is the bridge between everything before that and everything after that. Well, we didn't think it was funny, but later on, I mean, that made an impression. Dr. Louis Botma, who taught us labor economics for our first ever honors labor economics essay, he gave me 30%. And at that point, you had to go to the offices to get the stuff, okay? Almost like the poppy stuff of now. And when I walked in there, I said, okay, 30%. I mean, I have all of the numbers that you wanted. I got extra data, so. And he looked at me and he said, Anmar, but where's your structure? Okay. So Anton, if I give you grief on the storyline of the article and the structure, it probably comes from there. And then two other colleagues, Philly Burger and Frikkie Boysen, currently from the Free State University and Wits. Andre, you mentioned how you grew up together. Okay, so perhaps the three of us grew up together. Some of us took a little bit longer to grow up academically. But thank you, because we also went through that journey together. From the University of the Free State, I went to UNISA, and there I met Professor Philip Moore. Now, as you know, his textbook has probably educated generations of economists in South Africa. But the second week that I was there, Prof. Moore came to me and he said, Anmar, I'm reviewing this article for the SHIE. Will you just please double check if the econometrics is okay? And I looked at his review and I thought, wow. So I think that's probably one of the only articles that was rejected on the basis, not on the basis of the statistics, but on the basis of the rhetoric, or what McCloskey called, the arguments, the foundation, the basis. How do you? And I thought, wow, this is scholarly. Okay, so I appreciate that from the older scholars. Then Dr. Kriege Sieberits, he's not here, he's in Stellenbosch. Kriege, I think, is one of the most undervalued scholars in South Africa. We worked on a project with Rini with him. He has a vast knowledge of institutions, and dare I say, at my time at Monash, he was the one who would come to me and say, did you see the latest emerging markets review? Did you see the latest international modeling? And then we would discuss articles around that. So we will work with Kriege for some time. From UNISA, I went to Monash University, and there I met the Aussies. And yes, they are as competitive in the workplace as they are on the sporting fields. But Professor Russell Smythe, and now, I have to take off my glasses to see this. Professor Russell Smythe, I went to look at his Google Scholar profile yesterday. His citations stand at 22,400. Okay? He has an H index of 78 and an I-10 index of 327. He flew over from Australia to Monash because we had 3 new colleagues. And he came to us and he sat with each one of us and he asked, So what's your research field? What's your interest? What are your plans? But importantly, he asked, okay, Anmar, so what will you do to increase your international profile? What will you do to make sure that the international community recognize you? And he sat there, and for each one of us, he helped to develop a plan. So I really appreciate that. Dr. Gennady Kazekevich, he was in charge of teaching and learning. He got together colleagues from 4 campuses across 3 continents. We went to Kuala Lumpur and we sat there and we developed international units or modules together. And I will always appreciate his kindness and his sensitivity for the differences between the countries and how you include that in the syllabus. Then colleagues at Monash, 2 of them are here, Professor Aita, Dr. Kwame. Dare I say, Monash is the one place where I worked, where we worked hard, but all of us worked hard. Sometimes you come to institutions and you feel perhaps that colleague isn't really pulling his or her weight, but we were all working really hard. And you know everything that we went through, okay? For example, you had to second mark every exam script of the students. So Hina and I would be there, so he would mark it and I would second mark everyone. And in the beginning, we didn't really notice that end of business was Australian time. So we thought we had an extra day, and then we didn't. So, all the nights that okay. Kwame is the one with a wicked sense of humor. So thank you for our journey there as well. Professor Elsabie Loots, she's currently in the UK. Elsabie there started the School of Business and Economics, and she had to build that from scratch with colleagues from all over. And Elsabie did 2 things. The one was, every morning she would come to the corridor and she would go into each one's office and she would say, Anmar, is your internet connected? Hina, is your printer working? And if everything wasn't working, she would address that, and the next morning you could see. So I really appreciate her hands on dealing with that, but then also the way in which she sort of enabled us, encouraged us to do our work. So she was the professor in economics. I didn't have a PhD. But when we had to submit stuff to the economics department, she said, Anmar, you do that. Are you happy with that? Then submit. So that idea of trust in you and, yeah. And she also was the one who encouraged me to pick up the role of National Treasurer of the Economic Society. That was quite a journey. It helped us to get to know lecturers and colleagues from all over the country. That was quite good. And then that is where I met Professor Raymond Parsons. Prof. Raymond, we were in a meeting at NATLAC. You were the chairperson. That was my first meeting, and I was blabbing about the financials and expenditure and what. And when I finished, with his quiet, controlled way, he sat back and he said, thank you, Anmar. What decision do you want from this meeting? And that's where I sort of learned, Prof. Raymond, yes, meetings are there to talk, but in the end, it's about making decisions. So I hope that I will remember that. At UJ, Professor Ale Kabundi, as you said, my supervisor there, Ale was this quiet guy, but challenging me. Okay, so I haven't done modeling in eViews before or coding. He said, Anmar, you do it, and I had to figure out how. So Ale, thank you for the journey. And then the UJ colleagues, while studying there, Marinda Pretorius is not here today, Ilse Botha also not, they are busy with other stuff, but thank you also for your journey in the financial markets. Then, before I overstay my welcome, co-authors through the years. Dr. Jess de Beer, currently from the University of Namibia. Jess and I, you saw our first conference paper together. Jess introduced me to the financial markets. And as I said, I love work in the financial markets where there are high-frequency data, it's nice analysis, okay? So Jess was the co-author, and Jess had a way to do a literature review and to do a background. So it was wonderful to have that journey with her. And on a more personal level, her husband, Professor Dr. Martinez Kahl, he accompanied us as the 2 journeyers to our conferences. They were newlywed, but they took me with. And if there was a conference in Durban, they took Anmar with them. So, Martinez, if you watch this, thank you for chauffeuring and guiding us there. Dr. Frans Dreyer, who's always here tonight, Frans was co-supervisor of one of my first masters that I supervised here, a master's that ended up being upgraded to a PhD. Frans, thank you for that journey. The way in which you handled it at that point, I still regard you as wise beyond your years, so thank you for that journey. Professor Rini Schenk, who is here. Okay. I met Rini. She's currently from the University of the Western Cape. She has a Saatchi Chair in Waste and Society. I met Rini in a parking lot at UNISA, where we swapped boxes full of completed questionnaires. And since that day, Rini hasn't stopped running around, organizing projects, and she just has this energy. Okay? So Rini is a social worker by training. Rini, thank you for involving the economist in your work, and especially me. Thank you for allowing me to work on your data. And you are a true inspiration. And when Henry did the Gallup strengths, empathy was quite high on my list, but I realized when we do research, I'm not that, okay? So the economist would like to know, do you have a job? What was your income? Rini would add, do you have a support structure of friends and family? Where do you get water to drink? So, Rini, thank you for that angle. Okay. Then Professor Nick Theodore, through Rini and Derek, I also got to work with him from the University of Illinois in Chicago. He developed the questionnaire on day laborers, and after one of the surveys, I had the privilege of working with the data, and we went to Rini's house and we sat there for a writing retreat, and Nick was there, and I said, okay, wow, here's the result. Here are the tables, here are the graphs and everything. And Nick looked at me and he looked at the data and he said, this is the wrong question. And he sat there and he rephrased the whole research idea, the whole background, and he said, okay, Anmar, now I want this. Okay, so from the Excel tables, I want this answer and I want that. So, thank you, Nick, for that and for what we've learned from you. Professor Adele Berendt, former colleague of UJ, former colleague of Monash, currently John Kuping in Sweden. Adele introduced us to the world of collaborative consumption. So she has this data set on Uber. So we published an article on Uber. And she was here on visit a few months ago, and she said, Anmar, don't you know about this data on Airbnbs? So our next topic is Airbnbs. So Adele, thank you for allowing the economists to work with you. Then Professor Lochner Maree from the Free State University. My first ever research project, apart from academic articles, was under his guidance. And a few years ago, he involved us, me and Derek, with his mining town research. And the unselfish way in which he do that. So we have published 3 books, we are busy with other articles, and he just opened up his database. He said, here's the data, we need articles from this. He introduced us to his expertise and everything. So, Lochner, thank you for that. Then, Go Offer Blau. Apart from all his other good academic qualities, Derek, thank you for the technical care of our articles. Derek, I see Rini is nodding ahead. Derek will tediously sit and do the technical stuff, check every reference, submit articles, and if it is rejected, resubmit it. Thank you for that. Okay? Then, on a personal level, thank you for leaving the bright lights of Gauteng behind to come and live with me in Potchefstroom, where I feel more safe and where I could also further my career. Thank you for the journey. Then finally, to my family who's here from the Northern Cape. Tonight is supposed to be about me and my achievements, but tonight I would like to applaud you and all of the farmers, and now this is where I'm going to get emotional, and all of the farmers of our beautiful country for the way in which you managed to survive a devastating drought of 5, 6, 7 years. The way in which you managed to take care of your families, take care of your remaining livestock, and always had something left to share with others who are in the same desperate situation. In my mind, that is much more of an achievement than any academic title or any number of academic publications. So tonight, with you and all of the people of our beautiful country, we thank the Lord for the wonderful rains that has blessed and has brought relief to large parts of our country. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. Colleagues, I thought to just share with you the rigorous process that we utilize at the Northwest University. Being having the honor to be the previous executive dean of what we so lovingly called FEMS, the Faculty of Economics and Management Sciences, I can vividly recall the promotion process and where we had firstly the Faculty Promotion Committee that considers every applicant for promotion from junior lecturer up to professor. Then after that, you have the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's interviews, and I remember Prof. Robert Balfour chairing it, and I still vividly remember your presentation, Anmar, and I still have it on my computer, and how we talked before the presentation just to make sure that all the criteria is addressed, and it was a very nerve-wracking experience for everybody who's gone through that journey. We're currently busy with the same interviews across the university currently, and you can just see how nerve-wracking that process is. But it doesn't end there. After that, because both of these previous committees, the faculty and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's interviews, can only recommend to the Academic Promotion Committee. And then you have all the deans of all the faculties, as well as all the Deputy Vice-Chancellors. Now you sit there, and it's like, for me, it felt as a dean that you have to now present your candidates. And I still remember my files look like a CA student with all the tabs, because they can ask you anything about the candidates that you presented, and you want to make sure that you really present the faculty's candidates diligently. And but yours, Anmar, was so easy. We didn't have to look for stuff. We didn't have to convince the committee. And you must remember, we've got the scientists there, you know, the deans of the Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Science and Health Science, who feels that these other sort of faculties, you know, they're not like pure sciences, which I don't agree, because I think ours are sometimes much more difficult. If you can give me the recipe how to manage people in HR, for example, you will make a lot of bucks, because you appoint somebody and you think they're wonderful in the interview, and 3 months later you realize, oops, you made a big mistake, because human behavior is so difficult to predict. But Anmar, coming back to presenting you and going through that journey, it was so easy, because everything was done. And tonight, sharing this journey with us and this thought-provoking topic, it is clear that on the research side, you are beyond excellent. But what I appreciate is that me, not being an economist, could follow this inaugural address. And that tells me that you're an excellent facilitator of teaching and learning. And I also remember from your presentation your community engagement activities. So it is not easy to become a professor at the Northwest University. So many, many congratulations from the university, the management, on behalf of the faculty, all the colleagues in the faculty. We are extremely, extremely proud of you and for your achievements. And well done. And can we give her another hand of applause? Colleagues, this is now the official certificate which says that it's hereby confirmed that Professor Anmar has been promoted from 1 January 2021 to Professor. Well done. Colleagues, those of you who have become a professor will know that this is a very special handcrafted pens that is handmade for special occasions. So we don't want you to write your memoirs yet, but you can do that reviews for the journal articles of other colleagues. Well done. And that brings us to the end of the inaugural address.